So hello, everyone. I'm Doug Mead. I'm the host for today's presentation by Thomas Howells. And just a few ground rules. We'll be giving Tom about 30 minutes for his presentation. Please keep yourself muted. And then after the presentation is over, we'll be stopping the recording and opening up the floor for question and answer. And I'll be looking for people whose hands are raised and choosing someone to ask the question. And then we'll say goodbye. So as I mentioned today, we have with us Tom Howells of the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the U.S. And Tom is the chief of the Industry Economics Division, which is a very esteemed and valuable division with a long history at BEA that makes the U.S. input-output tables. And so in this capacity, he's making all the various industry accounts, not just input-output tables, but many other industry data and satellite accounts. And in the last 5 years or so, they've been really emphasizing the supply use framework and also doing some work with value-added chains and TiVA. So these are topics of international interest, and I'm glad to see BEA, really doing a lot of research in these areas. Tom has also been working with international collaboration with the TiVA, Trade and Value Added Statistics for APEC and North America. And another interesting project is an integrated BEA and BLS industry level production account. So this is a joint effort between these two big agencies putting industry data together, looking at multi-factor productivity and other industry data. And in addition, as I mentioned, the satellite accounts. So most recently, there's an outdoor recreation satellite account, and Thomas will also, I think, mention some work that's being done with research and development statistics. Tom has an MA in economics from George Mason University and also a BA from Brigham Young. So in this talk, Tom is going to talk about the BEA structure first, to give those of you not familiar with the agency a bit of information about it, and then go right into the talk to initiatives that BEA has been pursuing. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to give his talk. And Tom, we thank you very much and looking forward to hearing you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, thank you again for the kind introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, as the case may be. So I'll just see if I can share my slides here. This virtual environment is always interesting. I have my slides here on one computer and my notes on another computer. Hopefully I don't get confused about which computer I'm supposed to be looking at. Let's see. I had no problem sharing a moment ago. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Great.
All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you again for the introduction. So I'll just kind of dive right in. As Doug mentioned, for my presentation, I'll begin by providing a short overview of the BEA organization and a few of the products that BEA publishes that might be of interest to this group. I'll move from there to a discussion of some of the work related to our supply use framework that's currently on the BEA research agenda. That includes some new satellite accounts that are currently under development, as well as a new effort to develop what I'll call here single country TiVA statistics. Maybe not the best name for them, but some data that we intend to begin publishing soon that will provide some new ways to look at how U.S. industries engage in global supply chains. So without further ado, first, just a little context about BEA as an organization. You can see here the overall structure. You can see that the Bureau includes 3 core program areas focused on the production of economic statistics. Those include the National Economics Directorate, as well as the International and Regional Directorates. The National Directorate is highlighted there in orange, which is where the Industry Economics Division sits. The National Directorate as a whole
Tom?
produces. Oh, yes.
Your screens are not in slideshow mode yet, and they don't seem to be progressing. As you're talking about the 3rd slide, it's still showing the 1st slide there.
Ah, okay. Thanks for letting me know that. Well, now you can see what I can see. Thanks for getting me back on track then. All right, so as I was saying, here's the organization, and I was talking about the National Economics Directorate, which you see there on the left side, highlighted in orange. This group produces BEA's featured measure of economic activity, expenditure-based GDP. This group is also has primary responsibility for preparation of our supply use tables and the related statistics for the U.S. Those of you who may be more familiar with BEA may wonder where the Industry Economics Directorate is. About a year and a half ago, the Industry Directorate, which previously handled creation of BEA supply use tables, merged into the National Directorate, and so those 2 groups are now combined. And that reorganization is in some ways a final step in a long-term effort to fully integrate that featured expenditure-based measure of GDP into the supply use framework. And with this reorganization, it's allowed us to make a variety of improvements to all of our statistics, not least of which is a 30-day acceleration of our quarterly GDP by industry releases to make those data available concurrently with our 3rd estimate of GDP. So a lot of changes happening in a positive way. So digging in now to some of the relevant statistics produced by BEA. To start, we have our core industry data sets, which include our input-output tables and related products, as well as our GDP by industry statistics. The input-output suite of tables, of course, includes supply-use tables, make-use tables, our total and domestic requirements multipliers. With this audience, I suppose there isn't a need to go into too much detail about what these products are. The GDP by industry statistics provide key indicators for each industry, including gross output, intermediate inputs, and value added, all in both current and real terms, and all based ultimately on and fully consistent with BEA's input-output tables. I'll come back to talk about these core statistics, the input-output tables and GDP by industry statistics, in a little more detail on the next slide. Before I do that, I just want to note that we produce a range of other statistics, of course, and many of our products, most of our products are at a minimum consistent, and many of our products are based directly on BEA's input-output tables. These include BEA's various thematic satellite accounts. These are basically focused accounts designed to draw out or highlight certain types of activity that aren't sort of clearly visible in our standard products. I've listed here the satellite accounts that we currently have in production. Those include the outdoor recreation account, travel and tourism, and arts and cultural production. And later in the presentation, as Doug mentioned, I'll talk more about how we construct the satellite accounts and provide some details on some additional accounts that we currently have in development. And finally, we also have our industry level production account, which shows a breakdown of the sources of economic growth by industry, including details on labor and total factor productivity. So jumping back now to provide a little more detail about those core industry data sets, including our input-output tables, as well as the GDP by industry statistics. This table provides sort of a summary of frequency, detail, etc. The GDP by industry data set is published both quarterly and annually. That's referenced in the first and second columns here. Quarterly releases are published coincident with the third expenditure-based GDP release, which is about 90 days after the end of the quarter. The GDP by industry data set, the data are based on the North America Industry Classification System, or NAICS, and are published at roughly a 3-digit NAICS level of detail. The data go back to 2005 Q1. Annual statistics are published in September of each year, also at a 3-digit NAICS level, although we do have some information available at a more detailed level, about 138 industries in our underlying detail products. And the annual data, as you can see, go back to 1947. Supply use tables are published on an annual basis. They're released on the same schedule as the annual GDP by industry statistics in September each year. And we also release the more detailed benchmark supply use tables every 5 years. And those tables cover years ending in 2 and 7 for the United States. It's worth noting that BEA also produces quarterly supply use tables. Those tables are not currently published. They're internal only. Their main purpose is to provide the framework for our quarterly GDP by industry statistics. So that's a quick run through on some of the products that BEA produces. You know, I'll be happy to answer questions or provide more details during the Q&A afterwards. But at this point, I'll shift gears now away from BEA's current products to talk instead about some of the things that we're currently working on as a part of our research agenda. Okay. So first, on the topic of satellite accounts. In addition to the satellite accounts that I just mentioned on the previous slides, we're engaged in developing accounts on a number of other topics. Before getting into those specifics, however, I thought it would be worth talking a bit more about how we generate these satellite accounts, which are ultimately based in the supply use framework. So the process, as I've laid it out here, takes place in 5 main steps. First, these thematic satellite accounts focus on a specific and sort of specialized targeted area of the economy. And the first step is to determine some kind of criteria that help us decide whether a particular activity or industry is in or out of scope. So defining the boundaries. This boundary definition is in many ways the most challenging and most important part of the process in a lot of ways. It's a guide for everything else that follows. You know, our team at BEA, we are experts in national accounting, perhaps experts in the supply use framework, but we're not necessarily experts on the specific topics that these accounts are focused on. So we typically engage experts and stakeholders from outside of BEA to help define the scope of these accounts. So for example, for the arts and cultural production satellite account, we worked closely with the National Endowment for the Arts. For the outdoor recreation satellite account, we relied on academics in the field of outdoor recreation economics, as well as input from several other federal agencies that have responsibility for managing outdoor lands for outdoor recreation. So the point is we work closely with others to help define how these accounts should be set up. So once we have that definition in hand, the second step is now to turn our focus to the supply use tables themselves. As I mentioned on the previous slides, I talked about the level of detail at which the supply use tables are published. But of course, we have unpublished detail that goes beyond that 400 or so industry level, which is the most detailed level that's published. At the working level, our supply use tables are comprised of about 900 industries, 300 final demand categories, and about 5,000 categories of goods and services. that are available for purchase in the U.S. economy. So for this second step, we focus in on that list of about 5,000 goods and services and basically go through the list, use our definition of what's in scope and out of scope to determine which of these goods and services to include and which should not be included. Now, 5,000 goods and services is fairly granular. It's a lot of detail, but even so, we often find categories that are only partially in scope, and that brings us to this third step of estimating the partials. So just as an example, if we think about the outdoor recreation satellite, we might have a category called coats that we track in the supply use framework. But that category might include both ski jackets, which obviously would be in scope for the outdoor recreation account, as well as suit coats, which would not be part of the outdoor recreation satellite account. So a third step here is for us to identify these partial categories and then do the work to estimate what share of those categories should be included and which shouldn't. So this is basically a matter of finding data sources that allow us to estimate a percentage for each of these partial categories. Once we've done that, we have sort of a complete picture of all of the in-scope output, and then we can use the supply use framework to determine which industries produce that in-scope output, and that information we can then use to calculate for each of these 900 or so working level industries a ratio of in-scope output to total output for each industry. And finally, those output ratios we then use, we apply those to various other statistics, including value added, intermediate inputs, compensation, and employment, to generate an overall picture of activity within the account. Okay, so that's sort of the overall process. And so now, with some background on how these accounts come together, I'll talk a little bit about 3 specific satellite accounts that we're currently working on and developing. First is the digital economy. For obvious reasons, there's a lot of interest in how the digital economy fits into the broader economic picture. BEA released preliminary results on the digital economy last year, covering the period 2005 to 2018. We continue to work to improve our digital measures on several fronts, including improvements to price and volume measures, especially for high-tech goods and services like cloud computing services. Rapid quality changes make prices for these high-tech products very challenging to measure, and part of our strategy here includes searches for sort of unique data sets that can allow us to more effectively capture shifts in quality in these products over time. We've already included improved prices for software and medical equipment back in 2018, smartphones in 2019. We expect to include new prices for cloud computing services in 2021, later this year. We also have work ongoing on improved prices for things like ride hailing and internet and wireless services. So there's sort of a steady march of looking at these different products that's taken place in the past, and we continue to work on. Measuring the role of data is another aspect of this work, in particular looking at ways to measure data as an asset. And of course, we continue to work actively in international settings to help push these efforts forward internationally as well, including collaboration with the OECD and other organizations, with the OECD in particular on the development of digital supply use tables. This slide provides a nice overview of what is included in our current digital economy measures and where we would ultimately like to go with the account. The items in blue are within the SNA production boundary, while the items listed in gray are outside of that boundary. Our estimates are currently limited to those things that are within the production boundary, but we do have research ongoing on free digital services as well as data. We see infrastructure there, e-commerce, and price digital services that are in scope. Items in red, as you can see, denote components that we do expect to include, but we have not yet reached the point where they've been added to our experimental estimates. Here are some initial results from that work. So you can see here, from 2005 to 2019, the digital economy grew at an average annual rate of 6.8%, compared to about 1.8% for the total economy. Unsurprisingly, much faster growth for the digital component than the broader economy. In real terms, business to consumer e-commerce has experienced the fastest growth at about 12%, about a 12% increase at an average annual rate. Cloud computing second there at 8.9%, and of course it ranges all the way down to business e-commerce, which grew at about 3.5%. Okay, so that's the digital economy. Another area where we are doing research is the marine economy, or the ocean economy. As is often the case with these accounts, this is being done as part of a partnership, in this case with the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Prototype statistics on the marine economy were released last June, covering the period 2014 to 2018. These were only nominal results that we released last year, nothing adjusted for inflation at that point. Since that initial release, that prototype release, we've worked closely with NOAA. We've also taken comments from the public and from interested stakeholders over the course of the past year to refine the definitions and the way that we're presenting the data. And now we're at a point where this satellite account, we're ready to move out of the research phase and into a more official status, sort of dropping the prototype label, if you will. And the first set of official marine economy statistics, including inflation-adjusted results, will be actually released next Tuesday. So you can keep an eye on the BEA website next week if this is something that's of interest for you. And some early results. This is not what we're going to release next week, but is based on what was published previously. And here you can see the ocean or the marine economy there in blue as a share of GDP, about 2% of GDP in 2018, and that is compared or they're placed there in reference to some of our other more traditional industry categories. You can see that the ocean economy is a little larger than mining and just a little smaller than management of companies and enterprises. Finally, a third satellite account that again is currently under development is our space economy satellite account. You can see under the second bullet there how we've defined the space economy. Again, going back to that first kind of all-important step of figuring out what the scope for these accounts is. The space economy is defined to include goods and services that are actually used in space, space vehicles, for example, those that require direct input from space to function, telecoms or GPS that rely on satellites, as well as activities that are associated with studying space, land-based observatories, and things like that. There's a nice paper published. It was published last year on the BEA website that describes the preliminary results and the methodology in more detail that you can find again on the BEA website. And wrap this part of the presentation up by showing again some early results that show how different industries contribute to the production of output for the space economy. And you can see here the information industry is the largest contributor to space economy output, largely tied to the telecoms industry. So that wraps up my discussion of satellite accounts. I'll shift gears now one final time now to talk a bit about BEA's work on the TiVA statistics, trading value-added statistics. suppose I don't need to give a lot of background on TiVA, but I'll give just a little bit of motivation for why TiVA is important. TiVA statistics, of course, provide a way to look at foreign trade and how U.S. industries, in the case of the U.S. statistics, are engaged in global value chains, and they rely heavily, of course, on national level input-output tables. The iPhone is the classic example for highlighting the difference between TiVA and standard measures of trade flows. There's some research, somewhat dated now, by Diedrich, Linden, and Kramer on the iPhone 7 that illustrates the point. And according to them, the imported value of the iPhone 7 was about $240. And that would all show up in U.S. trade, in our standard trade data, as a $240 import from China. However, they also show that just 4% of that value, that imported value, was actually created in China. About 29% actually originating in the United States, and the balance, of course, coming from various other countries. And this, of course, is a reflection of what we already know, that the iPhone is assembled in China, but is comprised of components that are made throughout the world. So TiVA statistics provide us with this unique view of the supply chain that we don't get from other statistics. BEA has a long history of international collaboration on TiVA. We continue to work closely with colleagues at the OECD to support the development of the WTO OECD TiVA database. We've collaborated with China and with other Pacific region economies on an APEC TiVA regional database, and also are working with our colleagues at Statistics Canada, as well as at INEGI, which is the Mexican National Statistical Office, to develop a North America regional TiVA database. And we continue, of course, to engage in those international forums on TiVA and other topics as well. In addition, we're now working closely with the U.S. National Science Foundation to develop sort of TiVA-like supply chain statistics based just on the U.S. supply use tables. Producing these data in a single country framework, obviously we lose some of the conceptual advantages that come from working with a multi-country framework, but there are some practical advantages in terms of timeliness of what we're able to produce, flexibility, level of detail, consistency with official U.S. statistics, et cetera. So there's sort of a practical advantage, which we think makes this effort worthwhile. And the single country framework, of course, can tell us some quite interesting things. So we'll look at that. So here we'll look at some very preliminary illustrative examples of the kind of things that we can see from using just the U.S. supply use table. We're looking here at U.S. personal consumption expenditures on gasoline and other motor fuel. That dark orange sliver at the bottom of the chart is the value of imported gasoline and other motor fuel, but while the dark blue at the top, that takes up most of the chart, obviously is purchases of domestically produced gasoline and motor fuel. And so in the next slide, we'll see how the input-output tables can be leveraged to give us some additional information, in particular on the domestic production component here. Okay, so we can still see at the bottom there that dark orange sliver, which is direct imports of gasoline. But that blue domestic production piece is now broken down into several pieces that really summarize the supply chain for this product. So we have the goods section at the top, which would include the value added of things like perhaps the domestic U.S. oil and gas extraction industry, the value added of domestic petroleum refiners. Below that, the trade and transport section captures the value added of wholesalers and retailers, as well as the trucking and pipeline industries that are involved in delivering these fuels to market. The other services section that could include everything from the electricity needed to run a refinery, to machinery and equipment repair services, to legal services associated with the production process. Government is an almost invisible sliver there below other services, which really just shows that government plays a limited production role, at least, in this value chain. And then embedded imports at the very bottom capture the goods and services that are imported and used as intermediate inputs throughout the domestic supply chain. Probably a lot of this is imported crude petroleum, I think. So now we can see more clearly sort of a different line between domestically created value in shades of blue and imported value in these lighter shades of orange down below. And we get a breakout for the domestic piece of value creation by industry. Here it's, of course, very aggregated, but we could see this up to roughly that three-digit NAICS level of detail, about 71 industry segments. And we can also see clearly here the role that indirect imports, that embedded imports, play in this supply chain that otherwise is less obvious. So really, you can think of this as a visualization of the global value chain that delivers gasoline and other motor fuel to U.S. consumers. Now this, what we're looking at here, is what we can do with what I'll call the plain vanilla data set. Really working with, for the most part, this information could, with some limited exceptions, could be produced using data that are already available on BEA's website. But our plan is to expand beyond this plain vanilla data set and extend the supply use framework in various ways that we think will provide some additional useful insights. We'll talk a little bit about those. So a first extension is to link in BEA's data on bilateral trade into the framework. So right now, looking at those imports at the bottom of the chart, all we can really say is that this portion of value in the supply chain is coming from imported products, nothing really beyond that. By tying in our bilateral trade data, we can potentially break that section at the bottom down by trading partner. As a starting point, we're looking at breaking things down by major trading partner, Canada, Mexico, China, Europe, and rest of world, for example. So that's one potential extension. Another extension that we're currently pursuing relates to the level of industry detail at which all of this is being done. So our current supply use framework, as I've said already, breaks things down into about 71 industries on an annual basis. However, as part of our collaboration with the National Science Foundation, we're working to expand that as a starting point from 71 industries to 81 industries. With sort of a special focus on science and technology industries. We actually began publishing GDP by industry statistics annually at about 138 industry level beginning in 2018. So this is the GDP by industry suite of statistics, but not those the supply use framework. But we see this 138 industry level of detail as sort of a stepping stone that we're working towards right now. Each of these, as I said, right now we're looking at going from 71 to 81. Each of those 10 additional industries is a part of this 138 industry level of detail. And we hope over time to get from the 71 industry tables that we currently publish to this 140 level. Ultimately, though, we would like to publish these data along with the full suite of input-output products at roughly a 400 industry level of detail on an annual basis, which is equivalent to the level at which we publish our benchmark tables every 5 years. So that's sort of the long-term vision that we're working towards, sort of step by step. Other extension relates to the production of extended supply use tables. In a standard supply use table, of course, the world is divided up into industries. In an extended supply use table, industries are further subdivided by firm type. There are, of course, many firm type dimensions that could be of interest. The one that we are primarily focused on is a combination of ownership and multinational status. Specifically, we're working toward a set of extended supply use tables in which each industry is further subdivided into U.S. Parent multinationals, U.S. affiliates of foreign multinationals, as well as finally the third category, non-multinationals. And this work builds on a link between census and BEA microdata. It's a sort of a big product. It highlights the decentralized nature of the U.S. statistical system, that all of this information is not housed in one agency, and so it requires a lot of cross-agency collaboration to make this sort of thing happen. With this additional data, that would let us add sort of this multinational element to our picture of U.S. supply chains. Okay, so those last three extensions, bilateral trade, expanded industry detail, and firm heterogeneity by ownership, those are the areas that we're working on sort of most actively and where we've made the most progress at present. There are a few other possibilities that we're exploring or are considering exploring, and those are listed here. For example, we could potentially break value added itself down into capital and labor services, using information from the industry level production account in particular. Capital services could be further broken down by type of asset, which would give some insights into the role of investment goods in the production process. We could do all of this in a price-adjusted real framework, something that we're interested in doing, and we're already taking some steps to lay the groundwork to get to that. And finally, we do have some thoughts on how to do what I'm calling a hybrid model here, something that combines the single country and multi-country frameworks in order to maybe take advantage of the best of both worlds there. Okay, so that's actually it. I'll stop there. My contact information's here. I'm happy to take emails or calls on anything that we don't get to today during the Q&A. And in addition, there's a few links here that may be of interest, the BEA website, a direct link to our input-output data. The special topics page there is where you'll find links to all of our satellite accounts, and finally, a page where you can find contact information for BEA staff with expertise on a variety of listed topics. So with that, I'll end and I'll turn things back over to you, Doug.
Well, thanks very much, Tom, for a very full and fascinating presentation. You guys are awfully busy over there. I would like to just remind, including this presentation on the website. I'm going to stop the recording now. Also, the links I think are very well worth pursuing that Tom provided.